Would like to welcome you to the Expand Info Meeting. And what we always want to be about is seeing lives changed. You know, I love it every time we show one of the testimonies in church, every time that we have the opportunity to hear stories. Bryn was just telling me tonight about one of the kids that has recently graduated and just the total transformation that's taken place in his life. And I just say all over again, that's what I signed up for. That's why I want to do this. I want to see people's lives eternally transformed and eternally impacted by the presence of Jesus in it. And so we're really excited about that. So before we move on and do anything else as far as this is concerned, we just wanted to show one of the testimonies that we had recorded. This is just one of the guys that started coming to the church 4 or 5 years ago. And so he kind of tells his story. So check this out.
Cobb Vineyard is the first place that I received the Holy Spirit. I'd always been a believer, but until this church, I'd never actually received it. So after that, I felt the need to pursue God, and that's what I started doing. I started getting active in the church. I started going to Connect Track, which is where I learned what my spiritual gifts are, and which my main spiritual gift is serving. So I joined the home repair ministry so I could serve. And then things started happening in my life, healings. My daughter-in-law was having a very rough pregnancy. She almost lost her baby 3 times. And through prayer, through the prayer team, she had the baby when she was supposed to, and she's a beautiful, healthy little girl. And God just kept working through my life. The more I pursued Him, the more He would do. He healed me. I had injured my foot on the treadmill and was praying for someone else in my morning prayer, and the Spirit descended in me and my foot was healed, and I didn't ask for it to be healed. That was the first healing that I really experienced in myself. Next, a friend of mine, a coworker, came here to work on the networking, the copier, and he started telling us his daughter was extremely ill. She was in bed with a high fever, throwing up, and that she, they didn't know what was going on with it. So 3 of us prayed for him before he left. And when he left that morning, she was gravely ill. It took him 45 minutes to get home from this church. And when he got home, she ran to the door, greeting him, jumped in his arms, and was completely healed, which changed his life. He wasn't really a believer at that point in his life, but now he is. Another victory for God. The list is so long, I can't remember them all. It has just been incredible. Since I started my pursuit of God, He has just worked so many miracles in my life. Personally, I had a heart attack in 2010, and I didn't sustain any major damage to my heart. And I did suffer depression because it's a life-changing experience. And through people in this church who supported me and told me, if you believe in God and have faith that you're healed and do what you're supposed to, what the doctors told me to do, that you're going to be better than you were before. And I am. I'm healthier now than I was 20 years ago. So the experiences just keep going on. The more I serve, the more God rewards me. And it's just, since I joined this church, it's been one awesome experience after another.
Been joking around with everybody, just saying what that means is that if you join the church, your life will be perfect. That's What I just gave you, these booklets, have a lot of the information, some that we'll cover tonight, some that we will not. We want you to take them home, read through them. The first half really talks through some of the different ministries that are actively a part of Cobb Vineyard. In the very middle, there's a timeline, and we're actually going to look at some of that in a little bit. On the page after the timeline, there's a proposed floor plan layout of the facility that we're looking at building. And then the second half of the booklet talks about frequently asked questions. We tried to anticipate most of the questions that people have, but at the end of our time, you'll have the opportunity to ask any of the questions that come to your mind. And so we're excited about this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Lance and Julie at this point. So y'all come on up.
So it's great to see everybody. Some of you look familiar. Tonight's going to be pretty fun. Thomas has asked us to pray and listen to what God is saying. He's asked us to be obedient, and then he's asked us to let God stretch our faith. And that's really what the project is about. We're all going to be talking about a building, but Thomas has asked us to give some testimony about how God has worked on our heart in relation to the Expand initiative, I guess. We're going to do that in a little bit. And tonight is really about each of your hearts. And what we're hoping is God will speak to you in a way, in a variety of ways. And if there's anything that comes to your heart that you'd like to talk about, we'll talk about it. If there's anything that we can do to pray for you, we want to know about that, and we'll pray for you. We'll hand out some prayer cards. And tonight is really about each individual heart in alignment with God and the Holy Spirit. And Julie's going to tell you about the rest of the evening.
Well, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at a video that looks back at the history of Cobb Vineyard. God has been so faithful through the years and done so many great things here, and we want to look back and see just what he's done. As we prepare to look forward to the future of Cobb Vineyard, it's always important to look to the past. And I want to say that Lance and I are so excited to be involved in this campaign because there are so many people who came before us, like Stephanie, and people who have been here for years and years and years who have helped build up this church. And we hope to be a part of the group going forward to help grow this church even more. So we are just blessed to be involved with this. So as we go forward, let's take a look back first at the history of Cobb Vineyard Church.
Welcome to Expand. As I reflect back on the history of Cobb Vineyard Church, I'm amazed at what God has done and continues to do. From our beginning more than 20 years ago, where we were a group of 8 to 10 people sitting together in my living room, dreaming of a church that would make a serious difference in people's lives. We yearned to see people encounter God in a life-altering way that led to a lifelong pursuit. Within 10 months, we had launched out under the banner of Metro Atlanta Covenant Life Church, and we needed a place to meet. And we found one in Marietta at a place called the Shriner School. It was really one room with paper-thin pole dividers to break into smaller rooms. That would have been fine, except the adults were outnumbered by the kids, and the oldest at that time was 6. But God met us there, and He brought people who needed Him and allowed us to love them into His kingdom. And there, a group of pioneers planted seed for a vineyard that God has watered through the years. And then we were looking for another facility. We'd heard of churches meeting in Seventh-day Adventist buildings because they meet on Saturdays and are usually available on Sundays. So we contacted Marietta Seventh-day Church and began using their facility on Sundays. It was during this time when this fledgling group was discovering who God had called us to be, and richness and hope were added to the seed that had been planted. All along, we felt God wanted to connect us with the greater church at large. It was during the seventh-day season that we met this movement of churches called the Vineyard. We found a movement of churches that were passionate to abandon their lives to Jesus. We found a movement that expressed their love for Him in passionate worship. We found a movement that wanted to see the supernatural work of God demonstrated through normal, natural people. They, like us, wanted to change the world not by having Christians change where they attend church, but by seeing those who were not connected to God find their way home to Him. And on Sunday evening, August 1st, 1993, Cobb Vineyard Church came into existence. And then it was time to move again. The Seventh Day was looking to renovate and needed us to find a new home. And with that, we moved into what has always been affectionately called the Blue Building. We were a little concerned because it would cost us about $1,000 more per month. One of our leaders spoke up at that point and said, "Are we planning to grow or not?" To not step out in faith in this situation is saying we do not expect God to bless us and allow us to grow. It was during this period where we experienced the Toronto blessing, and we saw some amazing things happen and some very interesting things as well. It was also during this time that we began to gain more traction and saw our sphere of influence widen. We saw people come from many different backgrounds and spiritual experiences, and we witnessed God put together a powerful church that, even though still relatively small in number, was making an impact on our community. For example, it was during this time that a member of our church named Beth Day had a vision to serve those in need by distributing food. She rallied others to help and started a ministry that continues to this day, our Beth Day Memorial Food Pantry. Then it was time to move again. This time it was into a school setting where we hoped we would have a position of influence on neutral ground while being able to save money and look for a permanent facility. Little did we know that move would last 3 years and be some of the most challenging times in the life of the church. So the move was made to Kennesaw Elementary School. This season in the life of the church saw some very significant changes. Some people who had been leading various ministries stepped aside, and we began to see new leadership emerge. But through it all, God was faithful to hold us together and even allow us to grow. In early 1999, a friend came to us and said, "I found a piece of land that's right down the street from the school." Another church had a contract on it and wasn't able to come up with the finances, so they prayed, they dedicated it to the Lord, and they asked Him to use that land for His glory. This building sits on that property. Since moving into this building, we've seen God do some pretty amazing things. We're coming up on the 10-year celebration of the start of Celebrate Recovery, where literally hundreds of people have been impacted by the delivering power of Jesus. Over just the last 5 years, we've seen over 300 people baptized, many for their first expression of faith in a public setting. We've distributed about 250 tons of food to those in need. Our youth group has seen bodies healed and the manifest glory of God fill a room with a mist. Our college group has laid hands on people and seen bones move before their eyes and bring healing. We've seen the expansion of our staff to include Joel and Trace Balin, who merged into Cobb Vineyard along with some great folks from Crossbridge Church in 2010. We added Brent and Kristen Butts full-time in 2013 to lead our student ministry and been so blessed by them. We've sent out about a dozen people to serve as missionaries in various parts of the world and continue to send teams each summer to places in need. And we celebrate all that God has done in us and through us. What an amazing journey. You know, God has done incredible things, like the thing says. I mean, it's just been amazing to see and to experience. But you know, one thing that always happens, and it happens in our personal lives, it happens in the life of a congregation, it happens in the life of a business. You come to a crossroads time where you have to make a decision and ask yourself, are we going to bask in the glory and kind of coast forward, or are we going to take the best of what God has done in the past, and are we going to move forward and do what we believe God has called us to do? And so that's really where we are right now, making that leap that says we want to move forward and be everything that God has created us to be. That really is the impetus behind Expand. That's what we're doing. The world you and I are a part of is changing. That's not news to any of you. The moral and spiritual underpinnings that we've experienced and walked through for decades is eroding right before our very eyes. We see things that we never thought would be a part of our society, and all of a sudden it is. According to a census in 2012, and this floors me, there's about 620 to 630,000 people that live in Cobb County. Of that group of people, there are 328,000 that have no affiliation with any church whatsoever. Think about that. 328,000 people who have no connection to a local body of Christ. And that same survey showed 332 churches in Cobb County. And what that means is that if we're going to reach those people, every church needs to grow by 1,000 people. And they were very generous with their definition of church. It was any religious gathering, whether it was the Baha'i faith or the Unitarians or whoever it was. But if every one of those churches were evangelical, wanting to see people come to Christ, every one of them would need to reach 1,000 additional people. And that doesn't even take into account Paulding County and Bartow County and Cherokee County and Fulton County. There is no doubt, as long as heaven and hell are realities, we need to do everything that we can to partner with God to see people brought into His kingdom. We need to give ourselves to it. I was teaching at the college group a couple of weeks ago, and really just talking about how important it is. The first step in understanding how we reach people is that the first thing that we have to do is we have to make room for them in our heart. Because it's very easy for us to say, you know what, I'm a Christian, I'm going to serve the Lord, and I'm just going to do my thing and, right off into the sunset. Or we can step back and say, you know what, God, there are people that are facing an eternity without you, but not just the eternity, they're facing the rest of their life without you. And we have to ask God to help our hearts to expand, to be able to open up our hearts. But in addition to opening our hearts, we need to open up our facility to make room. Because if people started coming in at the level that we think that people are going to be reached, we would quickly not have enough room for them. I think that the Vineyard is perfectly positioned to reach into this society. I think that because of our commitment to sound conservative evangelical theology, married with the power and the Spirit of the living God, because we live in the Bible Belt. We live in this area where, everybody's a Christian. You can talk to anybody on the street and they can tell you the points of the gospel. Jesus was born at Christmas of the Virgin Mary and died on Good Friday and rose from the dead on Easter. I mean, they know all the facts of it, and yet they've never been impacted by the reality of the nearness of God. And seeing God actively at work and in such a way that it calls on them to give their life to Him. And I think that the Vineyard really is perfectly positioned for that, to be able to demonstrate and proclaim the greatness of God. So let me just say, I fully recognize that this building expansion won't save anybody. A building is a building is a building, like I said. But we really do believe that it is a tool that God has put before us. Last night, when we got through with the meeting, there was a gentleman that was here, a prophetic guy, and he just came up to me and he said, the whole time you were talking, the only thing I could think of was the story of Joseph. And how Joseph, before the 7 years of plenty, built barns in anticipation of the harvest that was going to come. He said, I believe that that's what God has put before us. And I think that that's a great analogy to what it is, that we're building a barn that we believe God's going to fill up. We've long wanted to host conferences and concerts and do all that kind of stuff, but with the size of our current facility, we just can't do that. People always ask, well, how big's the facility? Right now, it will seat about 230 people. But if we have 230 people in there, the fire marshal would not be very happy. On an average Sunday, or the way we normally set up on a Sunday, there's 172 chairs. What we're looking at doing is expanding that in such a way so that we can host concerts and we can host conferences and bring people in that we think would be very significant and speak a lot both to our church as well as the church at large around us. You know, we stress small groups. We tell everybody, be involved in a small group. You need to be in a small group. Well, a lot of those small groups meet here, which we're ecstatic about. We love the building getting used. But what happens too often is there's this collision course that takes place with having too many groups that are trying to use at the same time. The first Monday of our fall session of small groups, it was funny because on Tuesday morning we immediately began to get emails saying we were supposed to be in this room but somebody else was already in that room, we need to move over to this, you know. And it was just there's a lot of people that because of their travel schedules and different things, the only time that they're available to come and be in a small group is on Sundays, and specifically on Sunday mornings. And so you know, I mean, Don leads a Bible study that starts at 8:30 in the morning, and there's some folks that are very dedicated to getting up to being there. But as far as anything later than that, we really don't have access. We had a small group that met in the spring during the service time, and they met in the blue room out front, which is really designed for about 6 or 7 people, and they had 14 in their small group. They were on top of each other. You know, we need more room. We need more room for the kids, for our small groups, all that kind of stuff. Our foyer is totally inadequate for a church our size. If you sit near the back of the first service, or if you come in for the second service, you know that there's a collision of noise that typically happens. A foyer is meant to be a place for people to gather together and connect and build relationship and fellowship, and we want all that to happen. But what happens now is people come in, they start talking, other people, shh, you're disturbing, you know, all that kind of stuff. People in the back row can hear what's happening out there better than they can hear what's happening in front of them. You know, all this stuff is going on, and we need more space where that is concerned. Another thing that happens right now, any meeting that we have that is going to house more than 30 or 40 people has to be in the auditorium. It's the only room that we have that can house any more people. What that means is our auditorium gets a lot of use, again, which is great. But you know, sometimes you have a group of 35 people that are meeting in there in a room that would seat much more, and there's a feeling of lostness. What we would love to have is different size rooms that are available for different size of groups, because it changes the dynamic. It changes the feel of the whole thing, and so that's another thing that we're looking at. You know, I don't need to tell any of the ladies that our kitchen really is pretty inadequate for what all the different things that we do, and all of us guys really enjoy the eating part of it. But as my mama used to say, there's too many fannies in this one fanny kitchen, you know, and so we need more space there. I've also been told it's pretty obvious that this building was designed by a guy because there's no closets. And so we've tried to finagle around and do some different things. So from a facility standpoint, what are we looking at? Essentially, from right here over is the existing building. Old 41 is here, parking here and down through here, okay? So that's the existing building. What we're looking at is essentially doubling the size of this building. Now, the one thing that you need to understand, when we built this facility, we built it with the intention of the day would come when we'd be able to expand. And as a result of that, we did some things on the front end to help prepare for that. In Cobb County, the code was that a building 10,000 feet needed to be sprinklered. Well, this original building is 8,250 feet. It wasn't required. But we thought, you know what? When we expand, it's going to be required, and it's going to be a lot harder to come in and retro everything than it would be to do that on the front end. And so that's why you notice that the building is sprinklered already. The amount of power service that we brought in here was designed for a 16,500 square foot building. Even though we don't obviously use that much, but if you look in the panels, all that kind of stuff, there's space available for that. About 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we expanding our parking lot And the reason that we did that was in anticipation, because we had enough parking as far as code was concerned for our current facility. But by adding that, it actually prepared us to have enough parking for the expansion of the building. So what we're looking at doing is adding the auditorium. The auditorium will grow by about 67%, 67 to 75, somewhere right in there. And we'll move to a place where we'd have seating capacity for about 325 people. And be able to have a little bit bigger stage so that we don't have to have everybody in a straight row across in front. They'll be able to have some depth and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited about that. Another thing we'll do is triple the size of the lobby. Like I say, for me, the lobby is one of the most important parts of the entire building, because the church really is, the strength of a church is found in its relationships, is found in its connectedness. And so we want to have an area that is designed and set up for people to connect, for people to be able to fellowship and to come together. The long-term plans are to add a cafe and coffee bar and have tables that are set up in such a way that they're usable and all that kind of stuff. But it'll be about 3 times our current lobby. Another thing that I'm really excited about is the fellowship hall, which will be on the very back side of the building. That fellowship hall is about 2/3 the size of our current auditorium. And the plan, it says fellowship hall, it's really more of a student ministry room. Be where children's church, youth group, college group, some of those kinds of things will meet there, probably celebrate recovery. It'll be designed for any group that's less than 100 people. As I was saying before, if you take 40 people and put them in an auditorium that seats 325, and every time somebody talks you can hear the echo, it just has a feeling. The atmosphere is different. But you take those same 40 or 50 people and put them in a room that's designed for that size, it changes the dynamics. And so really excited about that. And it will allow us not to use the auditorium nearly as much, which will save on wear and tear on the chairs and the system and all that kind of stuff. We're going to put a stage in there with sound system, full setup in there. It will also allow us to add classrooms. One thing, we'll close off this wall, and so we'll have 2 classrooms here that are really conducive. I know sometimes we have meetings and it's very hard to have a class over there and a class over here because there's a lot of bleed over in sound. So there'll be a wall there, and then there'll be 3 more classes back down this way. And there'll be, this shows 2 classrooms. I think that there'll probably be 1 classroom as things are evolving. But anyway, ultimately we will come out adding about 4 to 5 classrooms that'll be available for small groups and student ministry and all that kind of stuff. You'll also see that there's a kitchen in there, and the plan is to install it as a full commercial kitchen. So we've already been looking at the different fixtures and all that kind of stuff to go in there, and plan on having a walk-in cooler freezer kind of thing. And so we'll have a real commercial dishwasher. So what we're doing is we are asking every person who is a part of Cobb Vineyard to do really about 2 or 3 things. And that is, well, first, pray for God to bless us as we move forward, but ask God how He wants you to participate. And then listen to Him, hear from Him, and obey what He says. What we're going to be doing on October 12th as part of our Celebration Sunday, we're going to have an opportunity for people to participate in a couple of ways. One, we're going to take up a one-time offering that day, and people can give a one-time offering. The other thing that we're going to have available is for people to make a 3-year pledge, and essentially that just says, for the next 3 years, over and above my regular giving, I want to give this much to the Expand campaign. Our hope and goal, the entire project will cost right at $800,000. So that's what we're hoping to raise, and over the full 3-year kind of thing. So, I want you to hear, we're not really asking anybody for money. What we're really asking people to do is to hear from God and obey Him. And whatever that looks like, I know for some people that they may say, gosh, $5 a week would be such a stretch for me. For other people, they've been blessed in such a way that wouldn't be a stretch. There would be something else. I encourage you to come to a place that stretches you, because at the end of this thing, if we come up with $800,000 and it's just because somebody wrote a big check and we make it, that doesn't require a whole lot of faith. But if every one of us at the end of it say, you know what, through the course of this thing, I drew closer to God. I had to listen to Him. I had to allow Him to stretch my faith and allow me to, then if at the end of it we have faith stretched, then that's a huge win. And that's really what we're after. God will take care of the details. God will provide what needs to be provided. What my desire for our church is that our faith will be expanded. That our ability to listen to God, hear from God, obey God, and follow through would just be just blown out of the water. Now, there's a couple of ways to kind of approach this idea. The guy way, or the simple way, is to, I shouldn't have said it like that, guy way, simple way. Anyway, is to take your checkbook and look at it and say, okay, at the end of the month, I have $642 left over. I could give part of that to the Expand campaign. The problem with that is it doesn't take any prayer, it doesn't take any faith, it doesn't take anything. Another way to do that is to start by just stopping and saying, God, all of it belongs to you. Everything in my life belongs to you. What do you want me to do? And allow God to speak to us and allow God to lead us and expand us. And so that really is what we're asking people to do. Does that make sense?